We're the engine, I'll give you that, but I was always the driver. Some people just aren't meant for the front seat. It's not an insult, it's just business. The clinking of champagne glasses from the table beside us suddenly felt like shattering glass. Xavier's smile was a bright white practice thing, a perfect mask of condescending sympathy. It hung in the warm, dim light of the restaurant, an expression I would burn into my memory. Our lead investor, seated between us, shifted uncomfortably. I picked up my water glass. You're right, I said. It's just business. We met 5 years ago at a tech incubator, one of those places that smelled of stale coffee and desperate optimism. I was the coder, the architect. I had built a sleek, powerful logistics platform from the ground up, but I couldn't sell a glass of water in a desert. Xavier was the opposite. He could sell sand in that same desert. He had the charisma, the jawline, the effortless way of making complex ideas sound like revolutionary gospel. We formed a partnership, an LLC, and became unstoppable. I remember the night we landed our first seed funding. We didn't go to a fancy restaurant. We went to a dive bar called the Salty Dog and celebrated with cheap beer and greasy wings, sketching the future of our company, Viridian Dynamics, on a damp napkin. He clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes alight with genuine excitement. We're gonna change the world, you and me. That felt safe. The first red flag was small, almost a compliment. He insisted on handling all the finances, all the client-facing accounts. You just focus on your genius, he'd say, smiling that bright, white smile. Don't get bogged down in the boring stuff. I felt seen, valued, and completely, disastrously naive. The next 2 years were a blur of success. We moved from the incubator to a minimalist WeWork space overlooking the city. We landed a massive contract with a Shopify Plus integration for a national retail brand. Orbs did a feature on Xavier, the visionary CEO. I was mentioned once in passing as the technical co-founder. He'd bring me oat milk lattes from Blue Bottle every morning, a small, consistent gesture that made the growing imbalance feel like a fair trade. He was the face, I was the engine. It worked. Then the cracks started to show. My profit share distributions were consistently smaller than my projections. When I questioned it, Xavier would pull up a complex spreadsheet. Have to reinvest aggressively, he'd explain. We need to look lean and hungry for the Series A funding round. It's all about the long game. I was working 70-hour weeks, debugging code at 3 a.m., and I let it go. I rationalized it. He was the business mind. I trusted him. The discovery was accidental, born of a late-night server crash. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I needed to access an archived file on our old cloud server and couldn't remember the password. On a whim, I tried the password we'd set that first night at the Salty Dog, the name of the bar and the year. Salty Dog 2019. Access granted. As the directory loaded, a folder I didn't recognize caught my eye. Project Sundown. My blood went cold. Inside was a mirror image of our proprietary code, slightly rebranded. There were contracts, emails, and financial projections for a parallel company, Sundown Labs LLC. He hadn't just been siphoning profits. He had cloned our entire intellectual property and was in the process of selling a white-label version to one of our direct competitors. For weeks, I had been building new features for Viridian, features he was simultaneously promising them under his secret venture. He was using me to build his escape raft from the ship we were supposed to be sailing together. My investigation began that night. For the next 6 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet, focused partner. By night, I became a forensic accountant. Used a discrete software recovery tool on my company-issued laptop to pull deleted files. I found the wire transfer confirmations. A total of $87,500 moved from our joint business account to his personal one, labeled as consulting fees. I found the incorporation documents for Sundown Labs, filed 9 months prior. He had been planning this for a long time. The breaking point came at Trellis, the kind of restaurant with tasting menus and hushed tones. Dinner was meant to celebrate the closing of the Vector deal, the biggest in our company's history. Our 2 main investors, Wallace and Maya, were there. We were all raising our glasses when Xavier stood up to make his toast. He spoke of vision, of bold new directions. And then he looked at me. He announced he was dissolving our current partnership structure and acquiring the company's assets to form a new entity. Framed it as a generous buyout for me, a chance to return to my passion for pure coding. Then came the line. You were the engine, but I was always the driver. Some people just aren't meant for the front seat. The world went silent. I saw the calculated pity in Wallace's eyes and understood Xavier had been poisoning this well for months, painting me as a brilliant but difficult engineer who couldn't handle the pressures of leadership. As the toast ended, he slid a business card across the table to me. It was for Sundown Labs. The cardstock was thick, embossed, expensive. On the back, in tiny, elegant print, was the name of the printer, a detail he thought was insignificant, but which would become the axle around which his entire world would break. The next morning, I called Zoe Tanaka, an intellectual property attorney whose card I'd picked up at a conference. She was sharp, methodical, and listened without interruption for 45 minutes. When I was done, she said only good. You have records of everything. Her retainer was $15,000, almost everything I had left in my personal savings. Transferred it without a second thought. For 3 weeks we worked. Zoe built the legal framework while I compiled the evidence into an unbreakable chain. There was one close call. Xavier sent me a Slack message one afternoon. "Hey, you haven't seen that old LSI backup drive from the incubator days, have you?" My heart hammered against my ribs. The drive contained early, damning proof of my sole authorship of the core algorithm. I typed back, "No, I think I wiped that thing years ago." My hands were shaking. The evidence binder Zoe prepared was a work of art. Contained 7 key exhibits. Server logs showing his IP address accessing the Project Sundown folder from his home network, time-stamped for 2 a.m. on weekends. The SWIFT codes for the $87,500 in fraudulent wire transfers. A signed copy of the Sundown Labs contract with our competitor. 47 printed emails where he promised them features I was actively developing for Viridian. Sworn affidavit from a freelance developer he'd hired for Sundown and stiffed on the final payment. And, my personal favorite, an ironic little cherry on top. The invoice for his fancy Sundown Labs business cards had been paid, by mistake, from the Viridian Dynamics AMX. It was dated 4 months before the dinner at Trellis, proving premeditation beyond any doubt. The trap was the final piece. Zoe drafted a simple, generous-looking dissolution agreement. Gave Xavier nearly everything he'd asked for. Buried in the standard boilerplate on page 11 was a single clause. A declaration, made under penalty of perjury, that he had disclosed all business activities and had not engaged in any ventures that constituted a conflict of interest or misappropriation of company assets. He would walk right into it, blinded by his own arrogance. The meeting was set in the glass-walled boardroom of our venture capital firm. The air was cool and sterile. Wallace and Maya sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, their faces grim. Xavier was practically vibrating with victory, tapping a gold pen against the leather-bound folder containing the agreement. He pushed the document toward me. "Let's just sign and get on with it." I folded my hands. "Before we sign, I have one small point of clarification." Xavier sighed, a theatrical display of impatience for the investors. "This is what I was talking about. He can't let things go." I ignored him and slid a single piece of paper across the table to Wallace. It was the bank statement showing the wire transfer from our company to Xavier's account, the one for $87,500. Xavier's smile tightened. He started to speak, a story about a short-term loan, a misunderstanding. Zoe cut him off, placing her thick binder on the table with a quiet, definitive thud. She opened it to the first tab. "This," she said, her voice calm and lethal, "is the signed contract between Sundown Labs and your competitor, dated 6 months ago. Leverages intellectual property that you are, in this document, about to attest belongs solely to the partnership you are dissolving." Then she flipped to the next tab. "And this is the invoice for your Sundown Labs business cards, paid for by Viridian Dynamics." The color drained from Xavier's face. The bravado evaporated, replaced by a raw, clammy panic. He looked from the binder to the stony expressions of the investors. It was a misunderstanding, he stammered, a strategic exploration. Wallace, a man of few words, simply said, "Get out." As Xavier stumbled from the room, a ghost in a tailored suit, I met his gaze one last time. "Enjoy the front seat." The fallout was swift and brutal. The venture firm's legal team descended, and Xavier was hit with a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, intellectual property theft, and felony fraud. The news spread through the tech community like a virus. His name became a cautionary tale whispered on Slack channels and at industry mixers. He lost the lawsuit, the judgment against him totaling well over $1 million including damages and legal fees. He lost his reputation, his network, and his condo. 6 months later, I saw him. I was at a sprawling tech conference, walking the floor. He was working a booth for a small, no-name CRM company, wearing a cheap polyester polo shirt with their logo stitched on the chest. Was handing out flyers, forcing that same bright white smile for strangers who walked past without a second glance. He didn't see me. He was just another face in the crowd. The investors, surprisingly, stood by me. They saw the value in the engine, not the driver. I reformed the company, now under my sole ownership. We moved into a smaller, brighter office filled with people I trusted, people who built things instead of just taking credit for them. There's a quiet satisfaction in the work now, a sense of earned peace. I learned that trust is a resource you allocate, not a default setting you give away for free. I'm more careful now, but not bitter. Last week, a reporter from a tech journal interviewed me for a piece on founders who bounce back. She asked me what my leadership philosophy was. I thought for a moment. "I believe in putting the right people in the front seat," I said, "and I make sure I know how to drive." The business was, finally, just business.